Okay, the first thing that you're going to do is take your piece of rectangular paper and you're going to tape it down to the cardboard. The reason why we're going to do this is because when the paper gets wet, the watercolor paper will begin to curl. And so the tape helps to keep it flat on the cardboard while it's drying. Okay. Next thing we are going to do is we are going to divide the paper up into 8 sections. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line with my pencil right across the middle. And then I'm going to divide it in half this way. And then I'm going to divide the 2 sides in half. You do not have to use a ruler for this. Some people like straight lines. Some people don't really care that much. Basically, what we're going to be doing is trying 8 different watercolor techniques. So each one of these squares is going to have a different technique in them. And this handout, Watercolor Techniques, gives you explicit directions on how to do each of these techniques. So if you'll notice, each technique has a name. Wash, glaze, wet blend, lift out. You're going to go ahead and write those names into each category. So for this one, it says wash. I'm going to write wash. The next one is glaze. I'm going to write glaze. So this is kind of little technique guide of all the techniques we're going to practice. And then you'll be able to use these in future when you are doing watercolor painting. So go ahead and pause the video and get your paper set up with your sections and your labels. Okay, all right, so remember you can follow along on the handout. It tells you exactly what you need to do for each section. All right, so before I even get started, I'm going to dip my brush into the water. And I'm going to actually squeeze water into each of the colors like this to soften up the paint so that I will be able to easily paint with it. Okay? You don't want too much, but you want enough to sort of soften up the paint. That's why I'm not pouring the water in, but just using the brush to get some in there. Oops, I forgot my white. Okay, I'm going to set the paint to the side, and I'm going to begin with the first technique. Wet the background, paint color on wet area. So I'm going to go ahead and dip my brush in the water, and I'm just going to literally paint water over this area. I'm going to try and stay within the lines here. Then I'm going to go ahead and get a color from the paint. I'm going to get some green, and I'm going to paint the green onto the water. So you can see the effect you get, a very light wash with this technique. Now, this is going to be basically what you use for a lot of your watercolor painting, because as you paint, you want to build layers. If you did want to make the wash a little bit lighter, or excuse me, darker, you get more paint. Okay? If you see that the paint is starting to pool, you can do 2 different things. You can get your paper towel and you can suck the paint up like that, or you can dry off your brush and you can suck the paint up with a wet brush or a dry brush. Okay, you see how it's lifting that up. All right. Okay, good. Next technique is glaze. Wet the background, paint color on the wet area, let it dry, paint over it, some stripes to show how the first color shows through. Okay, so I'm going to paint this with water. Now, if I touch the green with this water, the green is going to bleed over into this area. So there's a couple things you can do. You can leave a space between the wet area and the green. Or if it does touch, you can just lift it up with the paper towel like I did. So I'm going to go ahead and put one layer down with this red. And you see how I've left a little barrier here between the red and the green. Okay. Now remember, I have to let this dry, and then I'm going to come back and paint over it with another color to kind of see how they mix. Do you see how I've got a puddle of paint right here? I'm going to get my dry brush, and I'm going to go ahead and lift that out. So if you wanted to do highlights on a painting and take out some of the color, you just use a dry brush or a dry paper towel to lift out some of the color. Okay? All right, next one is a wet blend. This is really fun. You wet the background. Again, I'm going to leave a little barrier between the red. I'm going to get some orange. You can do any colors you want here. I'm going to do some orange, and I'm going to do some yellow. And see how the colors blend together. So I put a lot of water and a lot of paint on my paper, and I've got this blend here. I need to go and soak up some of the paint because I've got too much. But you can see how they sort of blended on their own. I didn't have to do much to get them to blend together. Okay. All right, next one is the lift out. I love using this for, like I said, if you want to make highlights on something, or I love doing this for clouds in a sky. So I'm going to go ahead and wet the background. I'm going to get some blue, and I'm going to go ahead and do a wash with blue. You can see I've got a lot of water on the page here. You don't have to have this much. And then I'm going to get my paper towel, and I can basically put it into any shape I want, and I'm going to just push down and lift up. You see how it makes these like cool cloud shapes? And I can do a smaller area like that. Okay? Now, if I just let this paint settle and dry, it'll just be nice and dark like that. And you'll learn these techniques as you go. Okay? So I'm looking back at my glaze. It's still quite a bit wet, so I'm not going to go back and paint over that just yet. Okay, stencil. I love the stencil. You're going to get some tape. You could use tape, you could use contact paper, and I'm going to make a design, on the dry paper. You want the paper to be dry, with pieces of tape. You could do letters with this. You could do a flower. You could do a stencil, like a cutout with a X-Acto knife. You could make a really detailed, beautiful stencil. Okay? I'm just keeping it real simple to show you the technique. And then what you're going to do is paint over the paper. So I'm going to get some water in my brush, and I think I'll paint over it with purple. And actually, I could mix it with, I'm going to do a purple red. See how the purple and the red blend together to make a sort of fuchsia color? Maybe put a little bit of blue down here. All right, I'm going to let this dry, and I'll come back later and peel off the tape. Okay, dry brush. This is for creating detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a moist brush. You don't want it to be super wet, but just moist. And I'm going to form it into a point. It's important that your brush is always able to make a point. If you're not able to make a point, then it's too worn out. I need to get a new brush. So I'm going to get some green, and I'm going to do some stems of flowers. Maybe I do some grass. See how I'm able to get detail because I'm painting on dry paper. If you feel that your brush is a little bit too dry, just dip it in some more water. You'll notice it's dry if you see little white dots coming through when you apply the paint. Okay. Let's see, maybe I'll put some little leaves on the side. All right. Now what I'm going to do is use my brush as a stamp. So kind of like if you have like a stamp that you might use an ink pad with. We're going to pretend the brush is a stamp, and you can use the side of it like this. To stamp a design on there. You can use the top of it like this as a stamp. You can push down to make a texture that way. Ooh, that does kind of a cool one. Okay, you can see how I went up into the wet area here and it automatically blended. It did like a wet blend because the paper was wet. Here it didn't blend because the paper was dry. Okay, ooh, wax resist. All right, so you're going to get out your box of crayons, and I like doing it with the white crayon, which I unfortunately do not have in here. I'm going to get a light yellow crayon and a light green. I'm going to try those. Okay, when you're drawing with the wax, you have to get a good amount of wax on the paper. If you just do one line like this, you're not going to have enough wax on there to resist the paint. Okay, so this would be a good technique if you have a specific color area that you do not want to blend and get any paint on. This would be a good technique to use a white crayon if you wanted to keep the area completely white, like the paper. You could put white crayon in. If you wanted to put texture into something, like a design of a couch or grass, you could put the texture in with the wax and then paint over it. So I'm going to get some green here. And you see how the paint does not stick to the wax. Okay, I can go in with my paper towel if I'm feeling like the paint's getting too thick, and lift some of it up. So again, you'll see the little beads of paint